They exist. Military intelligence says so. They don't make mistakes. That was Sergei Yastrzemski, the Kremlin's own spokesperson, speaking to international media in the year 2000. He wasn't talking about Russian special forces or advanced weapon systems. He was talking about something far stranger. Beautiful blonde women from the Baltic states who supposedly terrorized Russian soldiers as elite snipers in the ruins of Grozny. Today, we're diving into one of the most persistent and bizarre military myths of modern times. The legend of the White Tights, Olympic biathletes turned deadly mercenaries who may never have existed at all. The story begins not in Chechnya, but in the dying days of the Soviet Union. During the late 1980s, as the USSR crumbled, strange rumors began circulating among Soviet forces. There were whispers of female Baltic irregulars fighting alongside the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Beautiful, skilled, and deadly foreign women who had turned their Olympic training into instruments of war. The legend truly took shape during the First Nagorno-Karabakh War between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It was here that the iconic name was born. Soviet soldiers reported seeing female snipers dressed in white winter sports attire, the form-fitting outfits worn by competitive biathletes. The stark white clothing against the winter landscape created an almost mythical image. Ghostly female warriors appearing and disappearing like apparitions. These weren't just any women, according to the stories. They were described as Amazon-like, tall, blonde, athletic specimens recruited from Nordic biathlon teams. The connection seemed logical enough. Biathlon combines cross-country skiing with precision rifle shooting. If you wanted to create the perfect sniper for winter warfare, an Olympic biathlete would be the ideal candidate. The geographic focus on the Baltic states wasn't random either. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania had been forcibly incorporated into the Soviet Union and were among the first to declare independence as the USSR collapsed. In the Russian military mindset, these small nations represented the perfect combination of Western influence and anti-Russian sentiment. But it was in Chechnya where the legend truly exploded. Urban warfare is a sniper's paradise, and Grozny in the 1990s was the perfect hunting ground. As one Russian military observer wrote, "One experienced sniper is capable of doing what will prove to be beyond the capability of a tank, gun, or entire infantry subunit. Disable a commander, destroy a gun or mortar crew, control one or two streets, and most important, instill in the enemy a feeling of constant danger, nervousness, and expectation of a sudden shot." Russian soldiers in Chechnya lived in constant terror of sniper fire. Every movement through the rubble-strewn streets could be their last. The psychological impact was devastating. Knowing that somewhere in the ruins, an invisible enemy was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Into this atmosphere of fear and paranoia came stories that seemed to crystallize every anxiety the young Russian conscripts felt. The White Tights weren't just skilled killers. They were beautiful foreign women who, according to soldier folklore, took a sadistic pleasure in their work. Stories spread through the ranks claiming these female snipers deliberately aimed for Russian soldiers' groin areas, adding humiliation to injury in what was seen as the ultimate emasculation. The stories grew more elaborate with each telling. Some claimed the women wore makeup while they killed. Others said they collected $2,000 from their Chechen employers for every confirmed kill. The image that emerged was like something from a James Bond film, a combination of Lindsey Vohn's athletic prowess and Annie Oakley's shooting skills, wrapped in the body of a Nordic goddess and the soul of a cold-blooded killer. For months, these stories might have remained nothing more than barracks gossip, the kind of urban legends that spread among young soldiers far from home. But then something unprecedented happened. The Russian government itself validated the myth. In 2000, as international media questioned the existence of these legendary snipers, Kremlin spokesperson Sergei Yastrzemski went public with an extraordinary claim. Not only did the White Tights exist, but Russian military intelligence had confirmed their presence in Chechnya. This wasn't some low-level military rumor anymore. This was an official statement from the highest levels of the Russian government. The GRU, Russia's military intelligence service, had supposedly provided evidence of these Baltic Amazons stalking Russian soldiers through the ruins of Grozny. The international response was swift and incredulous. The Estonian government immediately demanded to see this evidence, sending diplomatic notes twice to Moscow. They never received an official answer. Latvia and Lithuania similarly protested the allegations, but Russia provided no proof to back up its claims. Despite this, Russian authorities claimed some success in their hunt for the mythical snipers. In 2000, they announced the arrest of a 22-year-old Ukrainian woman they claimed was one of these female combatants. The only problem? She was wearing a Muslim headscarf and combat fatigues, not the iconic white spandex of the biathlon legends. Two other women, supposedly snipers from Ukraine and the Baltic states, were reportedly killed in fighting near Dagestan. But once again, no evidence was provided, no bodies were shown, and no verification was possible. The lack of evidence didn't stop the story from spreading. Like a virus, the white tights legend infected conflict after conflict, always adapting to new circumstances but maintaining its core elements. During the Russo-Georgian War in 2008, the story resurfaced. Alexander Bastrykhin, head of the Russian Prosecutor General's Investigative Committee, claimed that mercenaries from the Baltic states had fought on the Georgian side, including a female sniper from Latvia. The Latvian response was telling. Defense Ministry spokesman Airis Rikvelis said, "We had thought that the ghost of the white tights had died in the Russian press, but now we see that it still roams Russia." Even as recently as 2014, during the early stages of the conflict in Ukraine, the legend persisted. A Life News correspondent reported unconfirmed information about Baltic women snipers fighting against pro-Russian forces during the siege of Sloviansk. The report was quickly walked back, but the pattern was clear. Wherever Russian forces faced unexpectedly effective resistance, the white tights materialized to explain the impossible. The myth's power was amplified by its penetration into Russian popular culture. In 1997, filmmaker Alexander Nevzorov's movie Purgatory featured two Lithuanian biathletes portrayed as sadistic mercenary snipers fighting for Chechen rebels. The film cemented the visual imagery of the legend. Beautiful, cold-blooded foreign women who killed without remorse. These films cemented the visual imagery and psychological impact of the legend in Russian popular culture. But here's the crucial point. While the white tights remain mythical, real women did fight in the Chechen conflicts. The Black Widow suicide bombers were a genuine and documented threat. At least 50 women were trained for suicide missions, and more than a dozen attacks were launched between 2000 and 2013. These were real female combatants, widows and mothers seeking revenge for lost family members. They posed a genuine threat to Russian forces and civilians alike. But they weren't foreign mercenaries, they weren't snipers, and they certainly weren't wearing white spandex. The contrast is striking. While Russian authorities obsessed over imaginary Baltic supermodels, real Chechen women were carrying out devastating attacks that killed hundreds. The myth distracted from the actual threat. So why did the white tights legend persist despite zero credible evidence? The psychology is fascinating and reveals deep-seated anxieties within Russian military culture. First, there's what critics dismissed as the sexual deprivation theory, the idea that young, isolated male conscripts were projecting their fantasies onto the battlefield. The combination of beautiful foreign women and deadly violence appealed to both desire and fear. Second, the foreign element was crucial. Being killed by a fellow Russian or even a Chechen fighter was one thing, but being killed by a beautiful blonde from Estonia? That represented the ultimate humiliation, the complete emasculation of Russian military prowess. Third, the Olympic connection provided just enough plausibility to make the story believable. Biathletes really are skilled with rifles, and many Baltic athletes had achieved international success. The logical leap from winter sports to military sniping wasn't completely absurd. Finally, the myth served powerful propaganda purposes. It allowed Russian forces to explain away their struggles against Chechen fighters by invoking a nearly supernatural enemy. You can't be blamed for losing to Olympic-trained Amazon warriors backed by Western intelligence services. The tactical reality in Grozny was quite different from the myths. Snipers were indeed devastatingly effective, but they were primarily local Chechen fighters who knew every street, every building, every hiding place in their own city. The urban warfare environment played perfectly to sniper tactics. Grozny became what military analysts called a three-tier fight: combat on the upper floors of buildings, at street level, and in basements and sewers. Russian tanks couldn't depress their guns low enough to engage targets in basements, while snipers could fire from elevated positions that were nearly impossible to locate and neutralize. Russian forces developed countermeasures that revealed their desperation. At checkpoints, they forced Chechen men to remove their shirts and checked for shoulder bruises from rifle recoil, powder burns on arms, and traces of gunpowder under fingernails. They brought in ZSU-23-4 anti-aircraft guns specifically to fire at extreme angles that their tanks couldn't achieve. These were practical responses to a real tactical problem, but they were responses to local fighters using local knowledge, not to foreign supermodels in white spandex. The persistence of the white tights myth reveals something important about how military folklore functions. Similar legends had appeared throughout Russian military history. Stories of female foreign fighters surfaced during the Russian Civil War in 1919, during World War II, and during the Soviet War in Afghanistan. There's a consistent pattern. Whenever Russian forces face unexpectedly effective resistance, mythical foreign women emerge to explain the impossible. It's as if the Russian military psyche cannot accept that local fighters, especially those from smaller, supposedly inferior nations, could outfight the mighty Russian army. Even Russia's own biathlon federation eventually mocked the claims. But by then, the legend had taken on a life of its own, immune to contradiction by facts or logic. The story reached its absurd conclusion in 2014, when the same mythical snipers were reportedly spotted in Ukraine, decades after they first appeared in Chechnya. The fact that these women would have to be in their 50s or 60s by then didn't seem to diminish the legend's appeal. In reality, modern conflicts have seen an increase in female combatants worldwide. Kurdish women fighters gained international attention battling ISIS. Ukrainian women have played significant roles in their country's defense. Israeli women have long served in combat roles. But none of these real female warriors match the mythical perfection of the white tights. And that's exactly the point. The legend persists because it was never about real women at all. It was about fear, fantasy, and the need to explain the inexplicable. Despite decades of investigation by journalists, military historians, and intelligence services, no credible evidence has ever emerged for the existence of Baltic female snipers in any conflict. No captured weapons, no prisoner interrogations, no photographic evidence, no intercepted communications. Nothing. In an age of ubiquitous cameras and electronic surveillance, the complete absence of evidence is telling. The real tragedy is that while Russian authorities chased ghosts, real threats went unaddressed. The Black Widow suicide bombers carried out devastating attacks that killed hundreds of people. Chechen snipers, real ones, inflicted significant casualties on Russian forces. But these actual threats were overshadowed by the search for imaginary Baltic Amazons. The legend of the white tights may be the strangest military myth of the modern era, but it's also one of the most instructive. It shows how fear and fantasy can shape military thinking, how governments can weaponize myths for propaganda purposes, and how the most persistent legends are often the ones that tell us more about the people who believe them than about the supposed events they describe. What do you think? Have you encountered other military myths that seem too strange to be true? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to explore more of what happened in Grozny, I recommend you check out this video we made of how horrible it was to be a Russian conscript fighting there.